I'm not a brown supremacist. I'm not saying my people are better than your people. I'm not, we're not trying to replace white capitalism with brown nationalism. We're not trying to replace, a white supremacy with brown supremacy. But understand that, oppressed nations and oppressed people, we should have a certain deal of revolutionary nationalism, that we should build pride in our people. We need to learn more about our history and learn about our people's history and understand that our people are beautiful. Yes, Malcolm X, our people are beautiful. And so for them to twist things around and say, well, socialism is inherently patriotic, and then they want to point to all these other places where you have a more homogenous group and people who've been there for a long time with, traditions going back hundreds, several thousand. Like, that's not America, bro. Like, America, this whole thing is based off of land theft and slavery and then imperialism.
Guys, just compare figures like Thomas Jefferson, Washington, even other figures like Monroe. Compare them to Ramon Emeterio Betances, Simón Bolívar, José Martí, Gregorio Luperonov, who was Betances' friend from the Dominican Republic, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, all these, or even Vicente Guerrero, all these figures, and look at what they were aiming to. They either A, abolish slavery in the countries they were in, that they liberated, or B, like Betances, they wanted to liberate first indentured servants as well as the African slaves and Puerto Rico. And compare it to what these American figures that I mentioned. They kept slavery, wanted to exterminate indigenous people, and they said it on a number of occasions, and they went ahead and did it.
Para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando. ¡Viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
One thing that I did want to talk about is this growing phenomena of what people describe as American patriotic socialism. I have a clip. This is a clip from Jackson Hinkle on American patriotism. I want to play this, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on what he says.
Jesus Christ, why are there so many comments about the American flag? I'm very much a patriot. For all of you that are just like, oh my God, burn it down, burn this country down. First of all, I just don't agree with it. But second of all, like, if you actually think that that is the type of strategy, that's the wording, that's the verbiage that you think is going to convince working class Americans to join on with your movement and to believe in a movement to fix this country, you got another thing coming. Socialism isn't about like tearing this country down or anything like that. Socialism is about using the mechanisms that we have in this country to build a 21st century socialism that is based on a history of American progressivism that will actually help this country and help the working class people in this country, which is the overwhelming majority of this country. I believe in patriotic socialism because I want to help people. Socialism is about improving this country and improving the lives of Americans. And if you don't see that, again, I encourage you to maybe broaden your horizons, open your mind a little bit. I think everyone kind of goes through a phase where they're just like, fuck it all, burn it down. But one of my closest friends, he's an indigenous climate activist. His name is Chitescott Martinez. He was posed the question, do you love America? If so, why? And he said, and I will always remember this because it stuck with me. He's like, I love America because of the, capacity for change that we have here. Like, we have the potential to create incredible things here. And I still believe that. And I don't think it's a matter of whether or not you believe that or you don't believe that. It's a matter of looking at our history and looking at the vibrant working class proletariat history and movements that we have had in the United States and solidarity that we have had in the United States. And there's been many efforts amongst, the ruling class and amongst even now progressives like Emma Vigeland, who will lie to you and tell you that there is no working class history in the United States. But if you've done your research, if you know your history, you know that that's not true. There is an incredible working class movement history in the United States. And we do have that capacity for change here. It's just a matter of whether or not we can make it happen. So I'm not cynical. Cynicism is the antithesis of progressivism and socialism. And that's why I have that flag.
So very interesting. I just want to read a funny comment. Shout out to you, Comrade Emma. Are we doing we have one indigenous radical friend shtick now? And shtick is Yiddish for like, act, song and dance, or like, your whatever it is you want to say. Comrade Pedro X, what are your thoughts on this as a Boricua, as somebody from a nation that has been colonized brutally by the U.S. for centuries?
Well, first of all, I know when a lot of these patriotic socialists like Jackson say, I'll talk about the progressive history that they like, they're usually referring to either the abolitionist movement, A, or B, the workers' movements that were led by CPUSA within like the 30s, around like the FDR era, or the era when the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party were also fighting under the leadership of the Honorable Don Pedro X Campos. So here's what I gotta say about that. If you really want to highlight that history, I wouldn't do it because A, when it came to the first example, the abolition of slavery, nothing really changed. Literally, after the Civil War came in, African people were thrown under the bus into Jim Crow and incarceration. As for the 30s, I also wouldn't really lionize that period neither, because once the white workers got their power, you know what they did to all the Black and Latino workers who fought at their side? They kicked them to the curb and never thought about them again. And whenever we tried to rise up, they would go ahead and oppose us in many cases. Like there's this, I was reading The History of the Young Lords by Joana Fernandez. There's this one time when these Puerto Ricans were leading a riot. They're having a riot in a part of New York. I forgot where it was. And they're fighting to have a civilian board that can investigate police brutality. Something really, really mild. And eventually they got it. The white population, due to them having a better relationship with the police, they came in and said, oh, that's whack. You spics don't need it. Yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, I can say that. But that's how they looked at us, and we never got it. So that's like, again, that's not really good. That's like, those are two periods that shouldn't be glorified. As for the American flag, dude, like our people always, like, for example, my people, we have contentions with that flag. That flag literally came into Guanica in 1898, and to this day it keeps imposing itself on our people. That flag is the reason why Puerto Ricans have been kicked out and getting kicked out of our island, coming to the diaspora, where we're treated like second-class citizens and beat down, brutalized, incarcerated, humiliated, and all those types of horrible things that happen to us. So there's literally, exactly, and also the racist imagery that came along with the time. Again, like there's no, like, that's why, like, that's just me. Like, the reason why I'm explaining all these things is to briefly say there's no basis for us to look up to that flag. And it's not just us Boricuas. We also have in the island of the diaspora, we also have the Chicanos who led their own struggle. We have the African people here. We're also going through similar experiences and who also have their own contentions with that flag. And I also like to add, before I pass it on to Victor, another point. And it is, you guys anybody here can challenge me on this. Look into the history of these three nations within the United States that I mentioned. You look into the Boricua nation, whenever we had to make an informed choice, we always chose nationalism. Look at the 1930s with Albizu Campos and the Young Lords as a big example. And then other groups that also had large mass support, which is, again, another blow against this American patriotism where we're all under the same flag. Look at African people. When they had to choose between the 30s, like CPUSA and Marcus Garvey, the majority of them went with Marcus Garvey. And after he got deported and the movement destroyed, then came Malcolm X. Who did they support? Did they support the integrationists or Malcolm? They at the end of his life, he was getting the support of all the African people here, as well as the people in his brothers and sisters in the continent. In fact, you couldn't go to the continent and say anything right to what Malcolm was saying, because they would boo you off the podium. As for the Chicanos, you can find this speech. You can find many resources, but and also Ramiro's video regarding national liberation. You see that the Chicanos literally were going for national independence. A big example is this meeting that was in UCLA, led by Reyes Lopez Tijerina and Rodolfo Corque Gonzalez and other leaders, who straight up declared their independence for Aztlán. And the majority of the people supported them, or they either supported them or on their way to supporting them. So these three historical examples are a blow to patriotism. I could go on, and we should definitely have another program for this. But yeah, these are the points, the historical facts that I just want to throw out there.
A lot of great points, Comrade Pedro. What about you, Victor? Your thoughts on, especially what Jackson was saying, that like, here's the thing, right? Like, before I turn it to you, Victor, like, if this was any other context, like if this was Latin America and the Caribbean, if he was like a Latino person saying this, I would definitely agree with him. Socialism isn't about tearing things down. 100% agree. Socialism is about improving your country and loving your country and wanting a better future for your working class. 100%. But what bothers me is that there's zero differentiation between the United States of America as an empire and a third world global South country like Cuba or Haiti. Like, where, they're totally different. Like, you can't just copy and paste that same model and apply it to the US blindly without understanding that there's a very drastic contradiction there. So Victor, your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, and so I actually was going to go there with that. So you're teeing me up here. I really need, specifically white, but I mean other folks do this who are in that camp, but specifically white communists, leftists who talk about patriotic socialism and want to compare this country to Latin American countries. Like, please stop doing that. That's disrespectful. Like, stop fucking doing that, because it's not. Don't think for 1 second that they say things like, well, there's the same history of colonialism and slavery and whatever. But please stop fucking doing that, because this country, okay, when you start looking at the demographics of this country, when you talk about white supremacy in this country, and people will say, oh, well, you had that in Latin America. Again, stop doing this, because I heard one program, I'm not even going to mention his name, but he literally said recently that the anti-slavery movement could be traced to the United States. Now,
I know which program we're talking about, but I'm not going to say it either.
Yeah, so it doesn't make any sense, because after the African slave trade route started in Latin, Africans spoke Spanish, French, Portuguese, way before they ever spoke English in this hemisphere. Okay, and so slavery ended in much earlier all over Latin America. Again, I'm not trying to play this, oppression Olympics game, but I'm just saying, like, if we're going to be historically accurate about this stuff, let's talk about, don't say stuff like that, because it's just not true. All right. But folks need to really stop doing that. Like, stop comparing, the United States to countries in Latin America. Please fucking stop doing that. Our people have real culture, right? Our people have real customs and traditions. Here, this shit is like, there's a reason why I never even heard of patriotic socialism until recently. I've never, in any of my circles, I'm 42 years old. Anytime I've ever organized anywhere in the tri-state area, anywhere, I've never seen the American flag with the revolutionaries I've been around. I've never seen it. So I tell people that too. It's like, if you think this is a true and tried theory, right? Then go ahead and try to practice that shit in my hood. Come to, I'll go with you. Let's go to Newark. Let's go to Camden. Let's go to Trenton. Let's go to Amboy. Let's go to my hometown in Amboy. Bring that fucking American flag. Pardon me for sounding disrespectful, but bring your pasty white ass to all these hoods in Jersey. Let's go to Philadelphia. Let's go to Harlem, and bring a big ass American flag and talk about American patriotic socialism. And let's see how that works out for you. All right. So I always say, like, look, it may work in certain communities, and I think we could have that conversation. I've said it before. Look, I'm a brown nationalist. Pedro X have talked, Pedro, you said recently you might start using that. And basically, my brown nationalism is formed after Malcolm X's black nationalism. It's patterned really after what he did with black nationalism. And I really encourage folks to read Malcolm X's speeches, especially his latter speeches, right? After he left the Nation of Islam, right? And all that means is that I'm not a brown supremacist. I'm not saying my people are better than your people. I'm not, we're not trying to replace white capitalism with brown nationalism. We're not trying to replace, a white supremacy with brown supremacy. But understand that, oppressed nations and oppressed people, we should have a certain deal of revolutionary nationalism, that we should build pride in our people. We need to learn more about our history and learn about our people's history and understand that our people are beautiful. Yes, Malcolm X, our people are beautiful. Our people have a rich history. We have music, we have dance, we have song, we have traditions, we have culture. And when we say we're brown nationalists, we're talking about that. We're talking about the revolutionary history of our people, right? All over Latin America and here in the United States. So we point towards, the Young Lords and the Black Panthers. We come from those traditions and those tendencies. And so for them to twist things around and say, well, patriotism, patriotic socialism or socialism is inherently patriotic. And then they want to point to all these other places where you have a more homogenous group and people who've been there for a long time with, traditions going back hundreds, several thousand. Like, that's not America, bro. Like, America, this whole thing is based off of land theft and slavery and then imperialism. So, let's have real intellectual conversations about this stuff. Stop calling us class reductionists. Stop saying that we're not developed politically. Oh, really? We're not politically developed? So in other words, you're just, again, this is the arrogance. You're smarter than us is what you're saying. You have a more politically developed, ideological position or whatever. Like, come on, man, you're being disrespectful, bro. Like, that's mad disrespectful. So I could go on and on about this shit, but it does drive me crazy. About this whole tearing things down too, just one other point. I work for a public utility company. I work for a natural gas company. If the foundation is rotted, you know what happens? The house is torn down. It's demolished. And then you build a beautiful house on top of a newly built foundation. So this idea that we can't tear things down, well, even in socialist countries or countries that are trying to build socialism in Latin America, what do you think they're doing? They're destroying things and building new things in place of that, in place of those things. So when whether it be Venezuela or Nicaragua or Cuba, when they took over, they had to destroy certain things and then build new things. All right. So there's not a contradiction there. But folks don't want to talk about this stuff because it makes them very uncomfortable. So it's just very easy to say, you're just not politically developed. You cute little brown communist. You're not politically developed. You have to be patriotic. That's the correct political position to have. Get the fuck out of here. You're disrespectful to me, bro. You're being disrespectful. I only want solidarity with people that want solidarity with me, specifically when it comes to white folks. Like, I'm clear on that. And it is important for white folks to organize other white folks. That's your responsibility. That is your responsibility. And I will hold you accountable for that. And we will help you. But I'm not going to get on my knees to talk to racist, retrograde white workers and show them this little red communist book and say, look, this is what ties us all together, even though you want to kill me and you hate me.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful, man.
I'd also like to analysis. One thing that Victor said regarding the foundations. Guys, just compare figures like Thomas Jefferson, Washington, even other figures like Monroe. Compare them to Ramón Emeterio Betances, Simón Bolívar, José Martí, Gregorio Luperón, who was Betances' friend from the Dominican Republic, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, all these, or even Vicente Guerrero, all these figures, and look at what they were aiming to. They either A, abolish slavery in the countries they were in, that they liberated, or B, like Betances, they wanted to liberate first indentured servants as well as the African slaves and Puerto Rico. and compare it to what these American figures that I mentioned. They kept slavery, wanted to exterminate indigenous people, and they said it on a number of occasions, and they went ahead and did it. And they also wanted to make people of color, like Black and Latino and indigenous people, second-class citizens. And if you look into the history, yeah, that's what they did, and that's what this society continues to do, because that's the foundation of it. So it's there's no equivalent. There's no way to there's no equivalence between Latino America and the United States. These are two totally different societies, totally different foundations that they're just not the same. And just another thing, when people try to say that there was settler colonialism, listen, I'm not going to say that the Spaniards and the Portuguese were perfect and an example or benevolent, because they weren't, But at the same time, they didn't come in and exterminate. Well, not on purpose. They didn't. In some regions, they didn't come in and try to have this big extermination plan for African and indigenous people. In most cases, they actually mixed with them, and that's why we all have our unique features and our skin tone and stuff like that. Why you see in our families, some of us look a little different, which is cool, But that's what happened. You can't compare it to the United States. And this is what Pedro X said, actually. He said when the Spaniards came in, they what happened in Latin America was a mestizaje, where the African and the indigenous and the Spaniard came in, and they mixed together, made a new race. While the Anglo-Saxon, when he came in, he exterminated the indigenous person, and he enslaved the African. And then at the time, this was during the 30s, he discriminated against the European immigrant. That's it, That's as clear as day when you take these facts into account.
Great, such a great point, Pedro. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Both of you guys had amazing points, especially about the history, the national question in Latin America and the Caribbean versus the U.S. And I think another point that really bothers me, the critique of anti-colonial, third world-oriented struggles from American patriotic socialists, is a complete discreditation, if that's even a word, or discrediting. There you go, discrediting the difference between exploitation and super exploitation. That as third worldists, we can explain that workers in Latin America and the Caribbean are objectively more exploited. And even Marx himself, I have Capital right here in front of me. One of the main parts of Capital that Marx dedicates a lot of time to is the theory of the rate of exploitation, where he actually provides a mathematical formula explaining how workers in the Western imperial core countries are less exploited than workers in India at the time. England, workers in England compared to workers in India, where you can't compare the surplus labor that is extracted from workers in the US, the UK, France, versus the surplus labor that is extracted from Haiti, Bangladesh, Brazil, where the rate is so much higher in the global South that it creates a super exploited majority. And I think that many of these people criticize third worldism or anti-colonial Marxist economics without even having properly read it or understand it. And even Ernesto Che Guevara himself, before passing away, was somebody who was leading the theoretical developments of this, or saying that the populations, the masses of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the exploited internal colonies of those regions within the U.S. will lead the revolutionary struggles of the 20th century. And that's exactly what we've seen. Where have the majority of socialist revolutions been? Asia, Africa, Latin America. Sure hasn't been, Belgium or France or Germany. And there's exceptions here and there. But we have to look at history as it unfolds objectively. We have to look at economics objectively. You can't compare a construction worker in the U.S. who makes $70,000, $80,000 a year to a sweatshop sneaker worker in Haiti who's making 5 cents a day. There's no, and you can't just flatten the contradiction, as my comrade Onyesanu says. We're all workers. We're all, just basing it on the relation to the means of production. Yes, right. Marx does say that what defines a proletariat is your relation to the means of production. Do you receive a wage? Are you exploited? Yes, 100%. However, part of the dialectic is understanding that when you have a change in quantity, you have a change in quality. When you have a change in the quantity of exploitation, which Marx explains in Capital, Volume 1, which he provides a formula for, when that rate of exploitation gets to such a high degree that you're super exploited, that a worker in Bangladesh has nothing in common with a worker in the UK, right? And we have to acknowledge this. We have to realize this and actually study Marx and not, just kind of do a gloss over of the working class and say we're all workers. We have to recognize who's most oppressed, who's, and not even from an oppression Olympics point of view, but from having the respect, having the humility to be like, you know what, I can play a role in this movement. And this is why I always tell people, I'm not saying that white first world workers will not have a role to play in the socialist revolution. Everybody has a role to play, but that role is very different from the people in the global South who are living and dying by socialism, who are under the threat of violence every day, who are being murdered, slaughtered just for being in a union, who are literally dying of hunger. Those are the protagonists of the global socialist movement. And we in the imperial core have to have the humility to be like, we're going to play a secondary, tertiary role to support those people. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to be at the forefront, with the megaphone and I think that's sort of like the arrogance of the first world, particularly the US. Like, people in the US are so accustomed to being at the center of everything that they can't imagine just being on the sidelines and helping out from the side. So, that's sort of like my little rant on that. I really appreciate you guys coming on. You guys were really a brilliant, amazing analysis, and I'd love to do a follow-up stream to this. I do have to head out because I have to meeting up with Ophelia for lunch, so I don't want to leave her hanging out there. But I love hanging with you guys, talking with you guys, and I'm glad this was such a great conversation. We support Russia and China. We support the People's Republic of China. We support the Russian Federation and Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk against imperialism and fascism. We denounce the ultra leftists who claim that Russia and China is imperialist. And at the same time, we also are very critical of people who want to sort of play these mental gymnastics and save what this entity known as America, which is a corporate empire that is drenched in blood, that has the blood of our people on its hands. And so we promote, whether it's plurinationalism, whether it's, whatever it is, we reject this idea of, America and hanging on to this, because it is fundamentally antagonistic to us as brown nationalists, as people from the global South.